We'll give everybody a moment to filter in. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Account-Based Friday. Each Friday, my co-host Meg and I host somebody special, and we got another special guest joining us from Colorado this morning, Brandon, who's the VP of Marketing at Chili Piper. And Brandon has done a phenomenal job on LinkedIn, and we're going to talk about LinkedIn, fractional CMO, kind of his trajectory, the whole 9 yards. Really exciting conversation. Before we jump in, as always, in the upper right corner of your screen, as you're looking at the screen, you can like and subscribe to all of the best practices. We're in the process of doing a little bit of a overhaul on some of those videos. So I would encourage you, there's 170 plus videos out there on best practices around demand generation, account-based, sales, SDR best practices. There's a ton out there. So like and subscribe in the upper corner. Each week we start off with a poll, and this week is no different. And we talked about the importance of LinkedIn. And this week's poll asking about LinkedIn was really how important is it to a personal brand? And probably not a huge surprise here that, well, first of all, I should caveat it. For those that have buyers that are on LinkedIn, I think I caveated, is LinkedIn important? And the majority of people, almost half of the 30 votes, came back and said it was pretty critical. And that was my vote too. But I'm curious, Meg, what was your reaction to this poll?
Yeah, I mean, I picked critical. And I can see where for some industries or, for some types of roles, maybe it's not as essential. But from my perspective, in the B2B go-to-market space, a lot of really great conversations are taking place on LinkedIn. There's a lot of opportunity to share and understand different points of view. And not being part of that conversation, I think, even though it can feel a bit like an echo chamber at times, I think not being part of that conversation hurts you more than it helps. And it's also a really good way to kind of stay on top of opportunities, of people who are changing their roles. So I would say skipping LinkedIn is a big mistake, at least in the space that we all participate in. And that's part of why I am super excited, Brandon, that you're joining us today. John and I have both had the opportunity to work with Brandon in past lives. And I've just continued to be so impressed by the work that you put in, Brandon, to really acquire new skills, new knowledge, and how you've really, I think, built an incredible B2B trajectory through your career. And it's been a joy to watch. And we're really excited for you to talk a little bit about that, about how, you've done a great job of engaging on LinkedIn as part of that trajectory. And also your present role and how you're thinking about the role of fractional CMO versus full-time CMO. So lots, as John said, great topics today, but welcome. And what are your thoughts on the poll?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for having me. I've been obviously a big fan of you two for a long time. We've known each other, we've been friends, and I've looked up to the work that both of you have done. And of course, had the pleasure of working with you both in the past. So I'm not surprised at all that the majority of people are saying critical. And I mean, I think when I think about like why I do it, one of the biggest reasons why I've done it is honestly, it's like I don't want to have to write a resume, have to update my resume ever again. When I need a new job, people know me. Hopefully I can just post on LinkedIn and I get some inbound. I don't know if, how close to that point I am, but I think I'm relatively close. So it's one of the big reasons. But also, I mean, like, having a following, building that trust. And I mean, that's ultimately the thing that's going to help contribute to that. And then I think it is good for me to get jobs. It's, hey, Brandon's got, X amount of followers. It's probably good for, it's beneficial for companies to hire people with followings these days. You see it a lot more. People hiring industry experts, subject matter experts, people, influencers in the space. I don't know if I consider myself an influencer, but I've got a nice little following.
I'd consider you an influencer. I think that's fair. Well, Brandon, maybe tell us a little bit about the road that you've been on, and maybe just kind of talk us through how you've thought about the different kinds of skills and knowledge you wanted to acquire, and the kinds of roles that you wanted to take on, kind of leading to your current one.
Yeah, definitely. And So yeah, learning is a big priority and passion for me. It's one of my own core values, and that really is how I ended up in a lot of different roles. It's about curiosity, taking on interesting challenges. So my very first like real job, it was an SDR. I was an SDR. It was way before they called it SDR, but this was, we're on the phone 7 or 8 hours a day. This was when we expected to do 100 plus activities a day, and now it's like if you do 50 as an SDR, you're good. But we were doing so much, and it was a boiler room. It was hard at the time, but I would not trade that experience for the world. And I took it as a challenge. How can I learn? How can I be the best? How can I do something different than all the other? I think there was about 20 SDRs and then about 20 AEs as well at that company. I always had a passion and interest for marketing. So after an SDR, I was an AE. After an AE, I moved over to the marketing side, and then learned about this thing called growth, and I wanted to get into the SaaS and more tech side of marketing. That's when I moved out to the Bay Area, and yeah, got a first marketing hire job. Learned a lot at that company, and then John Miller approached me and said, "Hey, I'm building my marketing team at Engagio. Why don't you come work for me?" Of course, we all know and love John. You don't say no to John, right? So I took that opportunity, and yeah, led brand and demand there for a bit. And then I do get a question all the time about how I made the move from being the demand gen guy over to leading product marketing at a company. And my answer there is always, well, I never tried to be the brand and demand guy. That was just kind of the direction my career was heading. And then I knew that if I wanted to be that marketing leader someday, I had to round up my skill set a bit more. And I've always done, like, as you do at an early startup, you do a little bit of everything in marketing. So I had that experience, and I had always been learning about product marketing. So I had some pretty strong ideas and opinions about it. So when I interviewed for the role of head of product marketing at my next company, they were Ring DNA at the time. We rebranded to Revenue IO. I think a lot of people still know them as Ring DNA because they were the best dialer around for a while. But yeah, I had very strong opinions about it, and I think it resonated well. So that helped me round out my skill set, and then yeah, made the jump to VP after that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting trajectory. And, I would agree with Meg. You are definitely an influencer. Just looking at your LinkedIn profile, you've got about 18,000 followers. I like to kid my daughters and say, I'm an influencer and I only have 8,000. And of course, they don't listen to me on that. But I'm curious, what have you learned about LinkedIn as, whether you call yourself as an influencer or not, you're doing something really well. You're attracting an audience. But what is it that's bringing that audience to you on LinkedIn specifically?
Yeah. So when I think about what I'm posting on LinkedIn, it's usually like, I always tell people, like, really pick a lane, and 80% of your posts should be in that lane. Mine is, of course, B2B marketing. More specifically, I'm gearing my audience to very tactical, hands-on, practical knowledge. So most of my posts are more in the weeds, how to, but I also really love the culture and the leadership side of things. So that's probably another 15%. And then maybe 5% is like, let me share a picture of my kids, because of course my family is a big part of my life. And I know I'm biased, but I've got the cutest little 2 boys in the world. And that's generally how I think about it. And I think more than anything, honestly, it's consistency. And I've been on and off the bandwagon or the wagon a few times on that. I'm back on posting 5 times a week, but I do think consistency is huge in just building your audience. It's showing up every day. It's not easy. Again, I've fallen off many times, but don't be hard on yourself. Get back on and really just, I hate it when people say this too, because it's cliche, but like, honestly, just be yourself out there, right? Like, don't try to be someone else, because I think people see right through that. It's not authentic. And yeah, a lot of people are like, okay, I get it. Let's be consistent. How do I come up with all these ideas? I actually have a what do you call Apple Note in my phone and on my computer, and it's just a long list of just random ideas. I'll be at the gym, I'll be reading a blog post, I'll be listening to a podcast, I might get one from our conversation here, and all I do is just jot it down in my note, and then in the morning, or sometimes it's at night, I pick one at random, I write out all my ideas, I turn it into a blog post, and then I post it.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that kind of discipline is, I think that's something that you hear from just professional writers, others who create content, is consistency. And also, like you said, just kind of maintaining those thought starters that make it easier to face the blank page or the blank screen, as it may be. And I appreciate that you do that, and that you're very, you're very prolific in terms of the posts that you make. How do you encourage that love of sort of acquiring knowledge and skills within your teams now? I think kind of passing that on. What are some of the ways you do that?
Yeah, totally. Okay, so yeah, as I said, it's a real core value of mine, and it is something that I value in teams as well, because I do think the best marketers out there, they learn faster than anyone else, right? And I wish there was some sort of metric around like speed to learning or something like that. But it's something that's so valuable, and I like to do that at the top as one of my core marketing team principles, right? Like you have your company principle or your company like values, but I also think it's important for marketing leaders to establish their own operating principles. And if it's not one already built into the team, it's something that I do try to build into the team. It's again, just the value of learning. And then from there, I do like to instill that in individuals within one-on-one. So it's like actually setting goals for people. What do you want to, where do you want to be, and how can we make sure we're setting you up for success in the future? And then actually creating plans with them. It's not enough to just be like, hey, Tom on the team, like, what do you want to be in 5 years? Okay, cool, good. All right, let's actually create a path to get there. What does that actually mean? What do you actually need to do today? And good managers will do that with their teams. And then giving them the tools, giving them the resources, connecting them with people. It might be, I know someone really smart in marketing or in operations or whatever. Let me connect you with them. And then, of course, get that feedback. And it's about regular check-ins. And then I do think like a lot of it is about leading by example too. Right? Like if I'm not always continuously learning, sharing articles, sharing blog posts, etc., then I don't think it communicates to my team that I actually believe in learning as a value. And if I don't, they're not going to either.
Gotcha. Yeah, we got a comment here echoing your idea of picking the lane and sticking to it, i.e. family. Lenise, thank you for commenting. And you can comment here directly on LinkedIn, and we'll promote. In fact, somebody sent me an anonymous comment here on a question that they had, and I'm going to pull it up here. It's about your current kind of trajectory. It sounds to me like you're in a fractional capacity and you're contemplating what's next for you. But
yes,
the question that came up was maybe a little bit of background around kind of the fractional movement that you're seeing in the market right now. Is it former marketers who quote unquote can't get a full-time CMO gig? Is it, a real demand out there? Is it just cost cutting? Could you tell us a little bit about your opinion on this? And maybe Meg and I could probably riff on this too, based on our own observations, but you're living the dream right now. So where do you see things?
Yeah, okay. So I think there's a lot of different reasons a company would bring on a fractional leader instead of full-time. I think, so I'm talking to a few other companies right now as well. And a big thing that keeps coming up is just one is budget. We don't have a budget for a full-time CMO. Let's start off with 15 hours a week or whatever that is. But the other one too is I think it's a big one, and I think it works both ways. I think it's a benefit for both. Is let's just try the relationship out, right? We don't need to fully commit right now, and I think a lot of times, like hiring is hard, hiring the right team, especially someone at an executive level, is hard. And I think if you are trying to hire a marketing leader or any executive, like the more time you can spend with them, the more time they can spend with everyone else on your team in the interview process, the better. The most of the time when I see people getting it wrong, it's because they rush the hiring process, right? So, and easier to do too if you're in the office. Then, okay, let's schedule a Zoom. Okay, now we need to work with everyone's schedule. So the next Zoom is going to be next week, but we want to spend more time with you. So then again, it's, executives are busy. So it's next week. So your hiring process can be really drawn out. But I'll go back to like spend as much time with them as possible. I think it's easy to fake it and, dupe someone in a 30-minute call. But if it's over time and you're really getting to know, are they showing up on time? Are they consistent? Are they, you said this last time, let's have another conversation about that. Or you said this last time, but now you're saying something different. Let's dig into that a little bit. Right. And I think that's how you hire a great marketing leader. Anyway, I think we kind of, I derailed the conversation a little bit. I'm really passionate about the hiring side of things, if you can't tell. Okay. So the other reasons I think someone would hire a fractional is there's like a change in strategy, or maybe there's a leadership gap. Maybe they have someone who's going out on leave or taking a sabbatical, or they just don't have the leadership for this amount of time that they need someone there. I think a lot of times previously they would just say, so-and-so is going out on parental leave. No one's going to be in that role for 3 months. Maybe that's acceptable, but I think it's very hard now. I think teams are learning that they do need that leader. The CEO can't just step in and be like, oh, I'll run marketing. Or when that does happen, it doesn't go well. Let's be honest, it does not go well. And I do think for the people who are going fractional, this is something that I hear a lot from people going fractional that is not talked about really on LinkedIn. And it's working with CEOs is hard, right? Like they're all over the place. I just heard a term that really resonated with me. Executive thrashing, in the sense that they can come in and they can derail a conversation or a strategy just because they had one idea that they talked to one of their buddies, a CEO at another company, and they're doing this, and now we need to do it because they were seeing really big success with it. Not to mention that it's an entirely different company at an entirely different stage in a different industry, but the CEO wants to do this, so now you have to go do it. And I think that executive thrashing, or that disruption that causes, does drive marketing leaders crazy. I know people who are like, yeah, I either just want to go fractional, so I really don't have to deal with that all the time, or it's easier for me to say, no, we're not doing that as a fractional, than someone whose paycheck every day and career relies on their CEO liking them. But anyway, yeah, or they want to actually take a step back and have a CMO between them and the CEO. Just have that extra buffer between, the craziness that CEOs can cause sometimes.
Yeah, I think you bring up an important point, Brandon. And actually, I think your discussion of hiring is related to this. There's that get to know you period. And sometimes you find that you don't want to go to work for that company the more time you spend with them, and
Exactly.
making a wrong choice, as you suggest, can be on the hiree side, is just as dangerous to as a company making the wrong hire. And I think the question of saying, are these just former CMOs who can't get a full-time job? Actually, I think it's people who no longer want that kind of role. To your point,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
you said, enough of executive thrashing, and you just get fed up. And you still want to do the work. You don't want to deal with the nonsense. And I see a lot of exceptional marketers in those roles for that reason. They want to do good work. but they don't want to have to deal with the crazy. So I see we've got a couple people commenting. Yes, it is definitely real. Executive thrashing is real and disruptive. And I also I think this is a good observation that we've got on the screen now. Fractional roles are for less mature organizations. Erica Seidel, who I think we all know is a fantastic recruiter, wrote a really good piece. I'll find a link and put it in the chat. But she talked about the fact that organizations go through distinct stages, and you need a different kind of CMO for each of those stages. And those stages don't last that long. So if you hire somebody full-time to do thing one, and then a year later, that's no longer needed, and you need something entirely different with a different set of skills, by having a kind of serial fractional leadership, you actually do better by your company. And I think for the marketing leader who steps into that, they're better poised to succeed because they've come in to do a specific thing, and then everybody can part ways and be friends at the end of that kind of assignment, if you will. And so I'm seeing that too. I don't know, John, what your thoughts are on that one.
Yeah, I think it's a combination. And we saw this back in 2008, and I hate to date myself, but in 1999, 2000, 2001, where companies were really reticent to hire. And you had to make 10 out of 10 requirements. Otherwise, you get voted off the island to get hired. And, the perfect candidate just doesn't exist. And so you're losing a lot of time. So I think it's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of the growth in this environment has slowed down quite a bit. So do you need the expense of a CMO if you're a CEO or a CFO? Is it something that you can maybe get away with part-time until growth resumes and then do full-time? I think there's that. And I think the third issue is probably board-driven, where the entire go-to-market function right now is bloated, particularly in SaaS, where marketing, sales, CS, everything is really high relative to the growth. So anything that can be done to cut costs, they're doing. So I as much as I'd like to say it's specific to marketing, I think CS is going through the same thing. I even think sales is going through it too, maybe to a lesser extent, but I think they're also experiencing the whole fractional movement. So just a lot of different things here. We got a couple more comments here. I like the try and hire concept. It benefits both sides. Meanwhile, most companies are not prepared for these modern hiring concepts. That's a great point. And I'm assuming these anonymous comments are coming through one of your broadcasts, so that's why they're coming up. And then there was a question here about any advice for a marketing leader moving from a well-staffed and funded organization to a startup organization. Any thoughts on that, Brandon? Because you've kind of seen that firsthand.
Yeah, you're the right person to answer that question.
So advice for the marketing leader themselves moving from well-staffed. Yeah, I mean, you have to enjoy the day-to-day, the hands-on work, and you have to set real expectations around just the resources, right? Because that is probably the biggest thing that I've seen companies or individuals who struggle is, I come from a big company. All I have to do is say, hey, demand gen team, go do this, or hey, comms, go write the press release, whatever that is. And then they go to a smaller team and it's like, okay, guys, who does this? Oh, there's no one who really does it. I got to step up and do it. You have to enjoy actually hands-on doing the work. You can't just be the, armchair general who goes and tells people what to do. It's really rolling your sleeves up. And that's why I love the startup side so much. And I think that's also a part of being a good leader and being having that hands-on experience is you're actually so close to the day-to-day and that you're still experiencing it. And then also too, when you get asked to be on a podcast or get on stage at an event, you're not talking about things that you did 5 years ago. There's so many experiences where I'm listening to the guy on stage or on the podcast and he says something. I was like, yeah, that was true about ABM 5 years ago. That's not how ABM works anymore. Or that's how intent data used to work. But all these companies have a much more refined way of using intent data now. So he goes up and he says that on stage. I don't know, maybe half the audience or more believes him. And now they are running their marketing in an old and outdated way. It's actually harmful for people. So that's why I love staying just so close to the day-to-day side of marketing. So you really do have to love that, but you also have to be able to still have the leadership and management skills. So it's a lot of context switching. If you like that, that's probably a good thing for you. If that's hard for you and you would prefer to stay on the more strategic side of things, then maybe switching to a smaller company is not the right way. And that's fine too, right? Like, know what you're good at and know what you like doing, and set yourself up for success by making sure you're doing those things.
Yeah, that's really good advice, Brandon. And I think that is important for people to say. People think, oh, going to a startup is going to be, relatively easy because it's a smaller organization. But to your point, you have to be prepared to be the one doing the work. And actually for some people, that's great, because sometimes when you get into too much of an armchair general role, you get bored and you want to do the work. That's great.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the right reason to take that kind of a job, is you want to get back to doing the work. But if, I think you do have to be very conscious of what that really will be.
Yep.
And what your day-to-day will be, and be honest with yourself. If it's not your gig, don't do it. There's plenty of others out there.
Yeah, and that's totally fine, right?
Yeah. So, Brandon, I would love, your thoughts on, as organizations and leaders kind of weigh the pros and cons of fractional roles. What would you say are the biggest advantages to the marketing leader for going fractional? And what would you say are some of the disadvantages for the marketing leader who wants to think about a fractional role versus a full-time role? And then I'd love the same question for the company considering bringing in a fractional person.
Yeah, totally. Okay. So we'll start with the pros, the benefits. The biggest one, honestly, I think it's like the work-life balance, and really actually being the manager of your own time, right? Because usually it's your contract is for a certain number of hours per week, and you can stick to that pretty well, and you're billing that. The other thing is you can charge higher hourly rate compared to your hourly equivalent to your salary, right? I've seen people who are charging over 2 times, as much as 1.5 up to 3 times their actual hourly rate equivalent to the salary. And then, so it's a lot better work-life balance and a lot more control over your schedule. The other one personally I like too is just like diversity of experiences and just kind of the flexibility. So I do value seeing a lot of different things from a lot of different industries. I think it's actually really valuable as a leader so that I can experience different things. And then I take, I like what this team does over here for project management. I like what this team does over here for their, marketing, their marketing meetings. I like what this team does over here for, how to run stand-ups or whatever that is. And you can learn, and then you can really adapt your own style, and then just improve how you operate. So I think that's a big one too, is just like diversity of experiences. And I think that's also a benefit to the company as well, right? They have a leader who's been in the seat for so many years, and it gets old, it gets stale. They just need fresh eyes. They need someone else to come in and look at things more objectively and then make some recommendations. The other benefit for fractional, I think you can just be a little bit more like strategic and focused. You're not in the day-to-day as much, honestly, because you only have a certain amount of hours. So you need to be very careful on choosing which things you can take on, and the company should be very careful as well, right? Like if they do need someone to write that email, it's probably not the best use of your time to write that, marketing follow-up email to the webinar that they just did or whatever, right? That, like, they're paying you a lot of money to do that. So they'll probably will give that to someone else on the team. And then just networking and growth opportunities. You connect with more people, you do a great job there. They're more willing to recommend you to their colleagues because everyone's pretty well connected these days, and it's about the network. Some of the cons, I think, you do have to consistently be going out there and drumming up your own business. It is work to be then selling yourself. It's a little bit different of a mindset for marketers, and a lot of marketers, when they're on calls, they're not used to having to close or having to objection handle, right? That's more of a sales role, but if you are a marketing leader looking to drum up more business, you are a seller of your business and yourself and your services. And then, so the continuous marketing and sales side of things, I do think there is a lack of like just deep integration with the team. They know you're not full-time. They know you're not 100% there. So they may leave you out of certain objectives, certain strategies. You're usually just in marketing or just on the GTM side. And I really enjoy like the people, the culture, the leadership, the management side of things. So you're not going to be brought into some of those other strategic objectives for the business. They're going to stick you in the lane of marketing or GTM or whatever that is. And then the context switching side, we briefly mentioned that, but like it is hard to go from, I'm learning this the hard way. It's, I've got a meeting with this company, then I got to switch over to this other company. Oh, I got to log out of the Zoom. I got to log out into the other Zoom. And then Slack, you can't have separate windows in Slack. So you just have one Slack instance. And it's like, oh, I just missed a bunch of Slacks from that other company. Let me go into the other Slack workspace. Like it is hard to do that context switching. I think I'm generally pretty good at that. I've always been able to go from one meeting to a next and talk about a completely different subject. But when you're also having to do that and switch like workspaces, it is hard. That part is hard. And then, I think it kind of goes with the lack of, integration with the team. But I do think it is limited authority and influence. Right? Like you don't have the final say as you would a marketing leader. You have to make that recommendation. And then it's usually the CEO that'll be like, yes, you're right. I like that recommendation. Let's go with that. So you do have just a little bit less authority and influence on some of the final strategies and actually executing on some of those things.
Yeah, it looks like we got time for one more question here as we wrap up at the bottom of the hour. And I would just add, two quick observations on what you just said on the pro. I think you can be the truth teller because you're not necessarily tied to the politics of the organization. So you can kind of speak your mind probably a little bit more freely, unless you plan on wanting to be there full time. You want to be more guided. I would imagine that's a pro. The con, I would think, is, and we've seen this, on the pressure to get short-term results right now is just off the charts for everybody.
Yeah.
So if the hiring authority has kind of a rent-a-car mentality, like, I don't care about this fractional CMO, it puts you in a very quick results. And as we all know, marketing takes a little bit of time to get good results. So that I imagine would be kind of a tough dynamic. But the last question here, where do you feel the best ways to get fractional job opportunities in today's market?
I think LinkedIn's a great place to do it. Like, someone told me, just go shoot your shot. Go out there, put it out on LinkedIn. Don't be afraid. Like, and then use your network and reach out to either other people that have fractional roles, because they're probably getting outreach a lot and then they have to turn down work, or just other communities like the pavilion community. You can go out there and say, hey, I'm going fractional. Would love to either hear about other people's experiences. It's a great way to get connected. Or two, hey, do you know anyone who's actually hiring fractional roles? I'm really just relying more on my network than anything else right now. So just putting yourself out there, not being afraid to, again, this goes back to just kind of putting that salesperson hat on. You really do have to, and you can't be you can't pull your punches. You can't be playing from your heels. You really have to go out there and be open, be honest, be straightforward with making those asks.
Yeah, well, then it makes sense. And people need help, so if you feel like you're the person who can help, you're doing others a service while you're helping yourself build, a book of business. So I don't think that's a bad idea. I think that's a great idea. And hopefully people, understand why that isn't a bad thing to need to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Brandon, so much for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom and your journey with us today. We always appreciate hearing from you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, Brandon, super excited that you're able to join us. Next week, we've got another special guest. We're going to be talking all things AI again Luis Rodriguez, who will be sharing kind of his AI thoughts. Every week we talk on this. And like I said, in the upper right corner there, if you want to get best practices of sales, marketing, SDRs, there's a bunch of stuff out there in video format. Like and subscribe in the upper right corners. And we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and happy Friday.
Thanks.